Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, diving into the Timberwolves offense. How can they become a top-tier offense this year? Is it shot selection? Is it some of the personnel tweaks? Is it execution? We'll break it all down on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. Today, we are going to deep dive into the Timberwolves offense. We're going to talk about last year, what was a middle of the pack and often lower third of the NBA offensive unit. How could it become a top-tier offense this year? We'll dig into some shot selection stuff, the personnel changes, and what some of those tweaks might look like in terms of overall execution this upcoming season. So we'll get into all that here in just a moment. A big thank you, of course, off the top for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. So last season, the Timberwolves offense, depending on where you look, was actually, really, both Cleaning the Glass and Basketball Reference had the Wolves as the 16th overall offensive rating in the regular season. For much of the year, they were actually in the lower third. They were like lower 20s or upper 20, I guess, however you want to look at it, like in the 20 to 22 range, 18 to 21 range, like kind of hovering around 20th in the league for a long time. They had an uptick toward the end of the season, and part of it was I thought Ant played better as the season went on. They actually shot more threes and played faster when Karl-Anthony Towns was not, when he was hurt in March and into the early part of April. And overall, that helped their offensive numbers. It wasn't, and I'm not at all arguing that the Timberwolves are actually a better offensive team without Karl-Anthony Towns. That's not what I'm saying. But part of Chris Finch's thing, and this I guess is we could hang on to this as a potential adjustment for this year. I wasn't really going to push on this too much, but just playing faster, right? Playing faster offensively. Chris Finch has talked about this. Remember the first couple of years, first year and a half, Chris Finch was in charge. He wanted the Wolves to play fast. They played really fast. And they've played slower and slower, with the addition of Rudy Gobert. Ant actually, believe it or not, likes to slow things down when he's got the ball in his hands. He doesn't often push pace when Chris Finch wants him to. Part of that is not the worst thing because the Timberwolves are such a good half-court defense. And remember, 2 years ago in the 22-23 season, they were a miserable transition defense. That changed last year. They were much better in transition. But overall, it's to the Wolves' advantage to play a little bit slower on the defensive end of the floor. Offensively, they can use some easy buckets. And it's a bit of a it can be a positive because they can play both ways. But that's an aspect that overall they're not great at. They're not great at picking up easy buckets in transition. And I'm not going to dig too much into this today, but there's Cleaning the Glass numbers about transition opportunities off of steals versus off of defensive rebounds. And they run off of steals because they jump passing lanes. Ant and Jaden McDaniels and some of these guys are really good at deflections and get it out in transition. But in terms of running after rebounds, after defensive rebounds, they don't really do that. And that's one area they leave some points on the table. But the argument can be made like, hey, the half-court defense is so good, let's just play less possessions because we're going to lock them down. We're going to keep the opponents to, 100 points-ish a game, as much as, like, better than any other team in the league. And if that's the goal, then that works to the Timberwolves' favor. But the half-court offense itself has been a little bit, muddy. It has been. And I want to dig into the shot selection. That's certainly one of the areas I want to talk about. But believe it or not, the shot selection wasn't all that bad throughout last season. There's a couple of other things, kind of subcategories within that we'll get into. But let's talk shot selection first. So there's a stat over at Cleaning the Glass, and I brought this up a handful of times in the middle of last season, but it's been a minute. So the overall location effective field goal percentage at cleaning the glass. What that means is, I'll just read the definition. If this team shot the league average field goal percentage from each location, what would their effective field goal percentage be? This gives us a sense of the efficiency of a team's shot profile. So, said another way, are they shooting at the rim and threes and not as many mid-range jumpers? Are they getting to the line? Based on where their shot attempts are, if they shot league average field goal percentage, how effective and efficient would the team's offense be? And the Timberwolves, believe it or not, finished last season with the 8th best location effective field goal percentage. It was actually a little bit higher earlier in the season, but 8th best in the league. 55.6%, which is a couple tenths of a percentage point over the league average. Their actual effective field goal percentage was 10th in the league, 56.4%. Okay. So the 8th best location effective field goal percentage and the 10th best overall actual effective field goal percentage. But the offense was 16th in the league, which means there's some other factors, the 4 factors, right? There's other factors that play this. We'll get into that. But I think there's still room for improvement here. Even though it was decent, I think there's clearly room for improvement in terms of shot selection. The Timberwolves didn't actually shoot that many mid-range shots last year. At least not like long mid-range jumpers, which are the absolute worst shots in basketball. Going back to, remember, that became an emphasis early, like Andrew Wiggins, Tom Thibodeau years. Like, they weren't, which of course Wiggins was initially under Flip Saunders and, and then eventually Tibbs. They shot a bunch of long mid-range twos. That kind of went away when Gerson Rosas took over, and Chris Finch has done a pretty good job of keeping that out of the offense. It crept back a little bit more last year, but it's not as much the long twos as it is the mid-range twos. The Timberwolves were actually 27th in the league in terms of frequency of long mid-range jumpers. So, like, the teams that shot the most, Phoenix, not surprising. I mean, but that's palatable because you have one of the best of all time, Kevin Durant, shooting long mid-range jumpers. You have Devin Booker shooting long mid-range jumpers. You can handle that. Chicago, of course, with DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine. They were number 2. Those are the only 2 teams that shot more than 12% of their field goals from long mid-range, which is twos that are greater than 14 feet away. Denver was 3rd, which surprised me a little bit. The Clippers 4th, Portland 5th. You go on down the list. The Timberwolves are 27th last year. Under 7% of their field goal attempts were twos from beyond 14 feet. However, when you look at the other mid-range jumpers, they're much higher on the list. Short mid-range jumpers, which is 4 to 14 feet. So basically free throw line and in, but not at the rim. The Timberwolves were 3rd. And think about all those Anthony Edwards short pull-ups, the turnarounds, less so Karl-Anthony Towns post-ups last year, but, a little bit of that mixed in there. Floaters from, Shake Milton kind of had quite a few shot attempts in there early in the year. But 3rd in the league, 24%, nearly a quarter of the Timberwolves shot attempts from the field this year came from 4 to 14 feet, which isn't a terrible place to be shooting. Miami was 1st. They had a good offense. Utah was 2nd. Toronto 4th in that stat. Detroit 5th. Sacramento 6th. Sacramento, of course, had a good offense. The Knicks 7th. Then Washington, Golden State, New Orleans. So you can shoot. I mean, like, shooting the ball from 10 feet is better than shooting the ball from 19 feet, of course. But you're also not going to draw a ton of fouls in that range. You're not drawing a ton of fouls on floaters. You're not. Kyle Anderson would be another one that really kind of buoyed that number or inflated that number of short mid-range shots. So high on the list there. Overall mid-range shots, you pile it all together, of course, the middle of the pack. 17th middle of the pack. 31% of their shots were mid-range twos, which is fine. That's not horrible, especially when they're erring on the side of more short mid-range shots. I want to talk about rim attempts and three-pointers and the type of three-point shots that the Wolves got last year and need to get this year. And then we'll talk about some specific players as well. We'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Game Time. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. There's tons of different events you can get tickets for. Obviously, sports. I love going to concerts. My wife and I will go to comedy shows, theater, Broadway shows, traveling Broadway shows. Like, all those you can get on Game Time. And Game Time Picks is awesome. They filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. There's also some great Labor Day offers that are happening right now at Game Time. And actually, I just pulled up Game Time now. If you're in the Twin Cities, there are some great deals. The Twins play the Braves early this week. Both teams battling for playoff spots. The Twins are likely to get a wild card, but only a couple games back of first place. And Atlanta, kind of the same deal. They're more on the fringe of the wild card race in the National League, but you can get some upper level seats for a Twins game for like, there's even a $4 offer here. A lot of it's $5-6 to get in on the upper level Target Field for Twins Braves on Monday night. Get a little Monday night baseball action here before football season kicks off. You can find all that over at Game Time. It's fantastic. Again, anything, sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. Also, they have the option to show all-in pricing up front, so you don't have to worry about surprise fees and stuff like that. You have to toggle the feature on before you shop. But if you toggle the feature on, you'll see your total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You can also look at panoramic views from your seat in the app before you buy. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game Time. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA. And Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. By the way, additional plug for Locked On NBA. I'm actually on the show on Monday. Talked to Jackson Gatlin, who's also the host of Locked On Rockets. He hosts the Monday Locked On NBA show. And we talked a little Timberwolves. So go check out the show today. I'll be on there. But again, it's every day, Monday through Friday. You can check out the Locked On NBA show wherever you listen to podcasts. All right. So in terms of shot selection for the Timberwolves, we talked about the middle of the pack frequency in terms of mid-range shots for the Wolves. If we talk about at the rim, Minnesota was 11th in the league in terms of frequency at the rim. 34.2%. So more than a third of their shot attempts come at the rim, which is above league average. It was 10th in the league, 11th in the league, or tied for 10th in the league. So no surprise there. Ant getting to the rim, Cat getting to the rim, lobs for Rudy, all that stuff. No surprise. 3-pointers is where it gets a little bit more interesting. The Timberwolves languished in the bottom third of the league in terms of 3-point frequency for much of the first part of the season. They finished the year 20th in terms of all 3-point attempts, 35% of their shots from the field coming from outside the arc. So more than a third, greater than their mid-range attempts and greater than the rim attempts, which is great. That's the way you want this. You want it to be, as many as possible outside the arc and at the rim. However, they were 8th in corner 3 attempts, 11% of their shots coming from corner 3-point range, and 25th in above the break or non-corner threes. So, well, it's great that they shot way more corner threes than above the break threes. They still only shot 24% of their shot attempts in the half, or overall shot attempts, not just in the half court, came from above the break, came from 3-point range above the break. Would I rather them shoot corner threes than above the break threes? Absolutely. And that's great. But they should be shooting more than 24% of their shot attempts as above the break threes, especially when you've got guys who are some of the best in the league at shooting above the break threes. Last year, Mike Conley shot 43% on non-corner threes. That's 98th percentile in the NBA. Mike Conley was 98th percentile on above the break threes. Karl-Anthony Towns, 42% on above the break threes. Same with Naz Reid. For bigs, that's 92nd-ish. Well, for Cat, I think they have him as a center in here, cleaning the glass. 93rd percentile. For Naz, 90th percentile. So they have 3 guys that are still on the roster that were above 90th percentile, shooting between 42 and 43% on non-corner threes last year. But less than a quarter of their team's shots came from above the break threes. Jordan McLaughlin, by the way, of course, no longer on the team. Talked about him on Locked On Kings last week. I think last Wednesday that show aired at Locked On Kings. And I talked with Matt George about Jordan McLaughlin. He was 100th percentile and above the break threes. Obviously, the volume was lower. He only played in 50 games last year, whatever. 52% though, and above the break threes. They had a bunch of guys that were great from above the break threes. They just didn't shoot enough of them. So again, 8th in terms of frequency on non-corner threes. If we want to look at accuracy, the Timberwolves were number 1 in the league in three-point shooting. Number 1. Again, 17th in 20th in frequency at cleaning the glass. First in percentage, 39.6%. They were also first in above the break three-point percentage, 39%. But they were 25th in above the break three-point attempts frequency. They're also 5th in corner three percentage, 41.3%. So a fantastic three-point shooting team. The only guys in the rotation, and I've talked about it from this angle several times, the only guys in the rotation last year that didn't shoot threes or couldn't shoot threes were Kyle Anderson and Rudy Gobert. And now they're replacing Kyle Anderson with some combination of Joe Ingles, who's a fantastic corner three-point shooter, more on that in a minute, or rookies TJ Shannon, Rob Dillingham. Both of them were good three-point shooters. Shannon more of a volume type guy, but should be able to shoot league average. And Dillingham was like 48, 49% on catch and shoot threes at Kentucky last year. So every single player in the rotation, except for Rudy Gobert, is a three-point shooter. They need to shoot more above the break threes. And if you pull out a couple of those, they, again, 27th in long mid-range twos frequency, so they don't shoot a ton of them, but take out a couple of those mid-range jumpers, make them three-pointers, make them at the rim. And that's a, albeit oversimplified version of how they could very rapidly improve this team's offense from middle of the pack, 16th in the league last year, to call it 12th or 11th or 10th. And they're not far away from becoming a top 10 offense. They shot a lot of corner threes, and they made corner threes really well. Now do the same thing above the break. They were the best in the league at above the break threes. They just didn't shoot enough. Let's talk about corner threes, actually. So corner three-point shooting last year, the Timberwolves' top 2 corner three-point shooters are no longer with the team in terms of percentile for their position. Monte Morris was 57% in corner threes in like 400 minutes with the Wolves last year, 27 games. Very limited sample, I get it. 57% in corner threes. Jordan McLaughlin is 46% in corner threes. They're both not on the team anymore. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was 44% on corner three-pointers, 81st percentile in the league. Nas, 42%. Mike Conley, 48% on threes. Karl-Anthony Towns, 38%. Jaden McDaniels is only 36%. Ant was only 35%, but Ant doesn't get that many corner three attempts. Kyle Anderson, of course, was 29% on corner threes. So you've got three players over 40% in corner threes. Nickeil, Nas, and Conley. Cat's just underneath. McDaniels is 36%. And of course, he was much better 2 years ago. Compare that to Joe Ingles. Last season, Joe Ingles was 46.9%. We'll call it 47% from outside the arc in the corners with the Orlando Magic. Okay, so 47%. Conley was 48%. McLaughlin is 46%. Nobody else on the Wolves was above 44% if you take out Monte Morris's limited sample. So Joe Ingles fits right in there, number 2 on the Wolves in corner three-point percentage, and it's a lot better than Kyle Anderson's 29%. So you're sliding in Joe Ingles as your corner three-point specialist in this case. And I know he's not going to play more than 16 minutes a game, right? What did he play last year at Orlando? Something like that. He played, 17.2 minutes per game last year with Orlando, which is 5 minutes less than the year prior, which was his lowest minute total since the first couple years of his career. So he's probably a 15, 16 minute a game guy, max. But he can knock down corner threes. Again, overall 43.5% on threes last year, 47% on corner threes, which is not fluky. The year prior in Milwaukee was 45% on corner threes. Injury year, coming back from injury with Utah, was 41%, which is still fine. Year before that in Utah with Rudy, 51% on corner three-pointers on high volume. So, and of course, that was we've talked about this before, the Bogdanovich, Joe Ingles role in the corners with Utah, Donovan Mitchell, and Rudy running pick and roll, and you put Conley, Bogdanovich, Ingles on the perimeter. That was very effective. League's top offense in terms of efficiency and top regular season team a couple years in a row. Or I guess once they were the top team in the regular season, but home court team several years in a row. That's effective. And the Timberwolves, Karl-Anthony Towns is a multifaceted offensive player, more well-rounded than Bogdanovich. And Anthony Edwards, I think, is I don't think there's any question he's more versatile offensively than Donovan Mitchell, even if he hasn't had like 1 year as good as Donovan Mitchell's best year in Utah yet. And I get that Ingles is older and Conley's older and Gobert's older, yes. But Ingles playing that spot up corner three role is going to matter. And TJ Shannon is going to have to hit corner threes. That's the thing that, like, Troy Brown, Shake Milton, they didn't do it well enough to stay on the floor. McDaniels dipped last year after 2 years ago being really good there. So that's going to matter. Again, the Wolves shot was the most. I'll pull the frequency back up here. I think it was the most corner threes. Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's see. Yeah, not the most. They were 8th most in terms of corner three-point frequency, but best in terms of accuracy on corner three-pointers. So more corner threes will be better. More above the break threes will be better. And the personnel is better suited for that. Even though they're losing McLaughlin and Monte Morris, there was some small sample flukiness mixed in there, no doubt. Joe Ingles has a career sample size of being able to shoot threes. And if he gets a wide open corner three, I don't care if he's 38 years old. If he makes it at a 47% clip, we'll be fine. Everybody will be fine. If Joe Ingles is in the corner for 15 minutes a game, squeezes the trigger 2 to 3 times a game, which is a lot better than Kyle Anderson squeezing the trigger 1.5 times a game at a 20-ish% clip. I mean, that alone is going to improve the Timberwolves' offensive efficiency. There's no question about that. Okay, I want to talk about a couple of other factors here related to the Timberwolves' offense, and that's how we'll close the show here today. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at FanDuel. You've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel here at Locked On Wolves. Well, that's because it's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, there's something a little different for you right now as we head into the fall. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. That's how I watch football in the falls. I'm a big football fan, big in fantasy football. And the best way to do it is the NFL Sunday Ticket. And, I mean, FanDuel is going to get you there, right? Again, now through September 22nd, just bet $5 on FanDuel. You get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to download America's #1 sportsbook. All right, so we've established the Timberwolves shot selection is fine, but improving it slightly given the personnel changes and a bit better shot selection, especially from Anthony Edwards, which I didn't dig into his individual numbers, but I talked about this, I think it might have been Minnesota Basketball Party a couple weeks ago. You just take one of his mid-range jumpers and make it at the rim or a three, and like that point per game is going up a little bit because he's so good in both those areas. And he's fine in the mid-range, and it's great that he can get his shot off at end of clock situation, heat checks, whatever. It's great, and it looks good. It looks like Kobe sometimes. It really does. Looks like Kevin Garnett sometimes, the mid-range jumper. But it's just not that efficient, and until he shoots it like Kevin Durant or Chris Paul or Devin Booker or, name another mid-range assassin, then, I'd rather him shoot a three or get to the rim, period. Again, it's nice to have it. Isolation situation, end of a game, end of the shot clock situation, end of quarter situation. Great. He can make it at a higher clip than a lot of guys. He can get the shot off over almost anybody. That's fantastic. He's big. He's physical. He's athletic. I get it. But in the regular course of a regular game, just shoot some threes and get to the rim. It's really that simple. And Ant is good at both of those things. And he's going to be the driving force behind this. And also behind getting the ball to Joe Ingles in the corner. Joe Ingles in the corner is a lot better than Slow-Mo in the corner. Okay, a couple of other, you look at the 4 factors, which we've done frequently here. A couple other areas where the Timberwolves struggled this year that kind of contributed to that middle of the pack offensive rating. The biggest one is turnover rate. And that's not a surprise. We talked about that throughout last season, and that's actually something else that improved. And that improved a lot as the year went on. And that was probably the biggest reason that the Wolves' offensive rating went from 19th to 16th over the last several weeks of the season, for the full body of work. Believe it or not, the highest turnover rate pretty easily of any player on the Timberwolves last year, that I'm taking out Wendell Moore and I'm taking out Daishen Nix because those guys played limited, together they played 125 minutes. So take them out of the equation. I would give you 3 guesses to pick who had the highest turnover rate on the Wolves, and I bet you wouldn't guess it. Maybe you would on the third guess. Number 1 by far, though, is Kyle Anderson. the highest turnover rate, the worst turnover rate on the Timberwolves last year was Slow-Mo, 15.6%. The next worst was Cat, and he was at 14.1%, a full point and a half behind, or ahead of, I guess, Kyle Anderson. Shake Milton was third, by the way. And he played, 500 minutes with this team before the trade deadline. So two of the top three most turnover players on the Wolves last season are no longer with the team. And we all know so many of Cats come from offensive fouls. And at this point, I don't know we can expect 29-year-old Cat to like truly mature in that area. We could hope. I'm not going to hang my hat on it. Gobert had a 13.1% turnover rate. Conley under 13%, which for a point guard is fantastic, and under 12%. We see the turnover rate continue to go down with the assist rate and usage rate go up, which is really nice to see. The biggest reason last year is he just shot the ball so much more when it was in his hands. But good to see, no doubt. And that's the same with like Nas, right? Like Nas had a 23% usage rate, so he didn't really turn the ball over. He also didn't have a very high assist rate, but Ant improved assist rate, usage rate, turnover rate went down a little bit. I talked about this with Josh Lloyd on Locked On Fantasy Basketball about a week and a half ago about Ant's shot selection and also him improving in the turnover category and also assist category while still getting more shot attempts. So turnovers are an issue. And who knows? I mean, Rob Dillingham running the show off the bench, could it be worse next year? That's possible. And that could maybe counteract some of the stuff I already laid out with the overall spacing and threat of Joe Ingles, TJ Shannon, Rob Dillingham from outside the arc, catch and shoot off of Ant and Cat creation. Rudy short rolls and kicking to corners. A Rudy short roll kicking to Kyle Anderson was not scary. Rudy short roll kicking to Joe Ingles is. But will that overcome a potential bump in turnovers if we get, you replace Kyle Anderson with TJ Shannon or I guess more accurately it would be Joe Ingles or Rob Dillingham running that second unit. Joe Ingles isn't going to turn the ball over a ton. Rob Dillingham might. So to me, that would be a little bit of a concern. I say that. Actually, Joe Ingles had a really high turnover rate last year. So I'm going to go ahead and undercut what I just said. I'd forgotten that. A couple years ago in Utah, it was great. Last year, he actually had a turnover rate of almost 22%, which would be by far the worst on the Wolves. This was more of a this wasn't like a 1 or 2. Now, again, limited minutes for Joe Ingles, but still not the turnover rate you want to see, and 5 points higher than Kyle Anderson. So is the turnover rate going to be any better if you replace Kyle Anderson with Joe Ingles, who's turnover prone, or replace him with Rob Dillingham, who's a rookie point guard who's undersized? That could still be an issue, which just underscores how important the shot selection and the Wolves shooting the ball as well as they did last year. And I don't think the Wolves' three-point percentage last year was fluky because Ant was still slightly below league average. Cat was still hurt for 6 weeks, and he's one of the best shooters in the league. Conley's been one of the best shooters in the league for years now. Nas, he's the one that had the biggest jump. Can he sustain a 40+% three-point shooting? Can Nickeil Alexander-Walker still be in the 39% range? He turned into a pumpkin a little bit as the playoffs went on. Those are big ifs. But I think they're still going to be a top 5 three-point shooting team. The question is, can they improve turnovers? I don't think the offensive rebound rate is going to get any better. That was bottom third of the league last year, 22nd, according to Basketball Reference. That's just not how they play. The Wolves need to get back defensively. They need to get back and protect the rim in transition, protect the three-point line in transition. They just don't have guys who are going to pull down a ton of offensive rebounds. Like that's not part of the Timberwolves' offensive strategy. Like Rudy's really the only one. He actually had an offensive rebound rate over 13%. Nobody else is greater than 5.5%. Unless Luka Garza gets some minutes, we may see that look differently if Luka's on the floor. All right. So all that to say, 3-point shooting is there. They need to shoot a few more above the break, a few less from mid-range overall. I don't think the turnover rate improves all that much with Joe Ingles and Rob Dillingham replacing Kyle Anderson, but it could a little bit. I do think the spacing and the three-point shooting continues to improve because of the addition of Joe Ingles, the threat of TJ Shannon, Rob Dillingham catch and shoot. I think that's going to matter. Pretty interested to see how that shakes out this year. All right. We'll dig a bit into the defense here later in the week. Focus on the offense today. We'll do defense later. But the offense, of course, is the one. I mean, can they go from 16th to basically top third? If they're a top third offense and a top 1 to 3 defense again, look out. I think that 52.5 win total could be an easy over. It certainly would be if they were a top 10 offense, but it really isn't that big of a difference as we continue to see Ant's growth as well. That's going to be a big piece of this too, of course. All right. That's all we got for you today. We'll be back on Wednesday with another show. We'll dig into defense later in the week. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Thanks once again for making us your first listen. Now go check out the Locked On NBA podcast. Again, yours truly is on today's show, Monday's show, where the season never ends, providing national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NBA in the description, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.